My name is Kelsey Foster. I'm the Public Information Officer with the City of Edmonds, and we're very pleased to be hosting this informational event tonight. And I'm here to introduce Dante DiSabatino, who has the longest job title in the world, so I'm not going to attempt to try and say it. You can see it there, but he's the Tsunami Program Director, short way of saying what he does, with the State of Washington Emergency Management Division. Did I say that part right at least? All right, so welcome, Dante.
All right, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me out to talk with you all about tsunamis and earthquakes in Edmonds. Of course, my computer did the thing I didn't want it to do right now, so let me just fix that. Great, all right. I'm Italian, so I'm going to walk around and use my hands. So I'm going to grab the microphone. But yeah, so my name is Dante DiSabatino. I'm the Tsunami Vertical Evacuation Structure Project Manager. I've been working with Washington State Emergency Management Division now for just about a little over 3 years. And I've been a part of the Tsunami program that entire time. But I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about earthquakes and tsunami, what that risk looks like, so you can have a better understanding of how you can best prepare yourself, your communities, work with your neighbors, and ultimately make plans, build kits, and learn about your hazards. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Washington is earthquake country. Washington has the second highest earthquake risk in the United States, and that's behind California. There's a lot of different kind of earthquakes that we can experience throughout our state depending on the kind of earthquake faults themselves. So this is a good image, and along with my "you are here"-ish kind of graphic here. But we can have subduction zone earthquakes. That's when one tectonic plate is going underneath the other. Off the coast of Washington, there's a 700-mile-long fault called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. How many of us have heard about the Cascadia Subduction Zone or the big one before? I saw a couple more hands go up when you heard the big one. Subduction zone faults can cause some of the world's largest earthquakes and tsunamis. So we have one of these nestled off the coast of Washington. These magnitudes can be 9 or higher, so that's very high. But ultimately, that's one of the kinds of earthquakes that we can experience here in Washington. Another one is when on that same subduction zone, when one plate's going far underneath the other, they're called deep subducting zone earthquakes. Those can be pretty common as well. They're a little bit more common. How many of us experienced a 2001 Nisqually earthquake? So that was an example of what one of those are. So it was around I don't remember the exact magnitude, but ultimately those are a little bit more frequent. These do not cause tsunamis directly, but ultimately because they're so deep in the Earth's crust. Speaking of crust, we also can have crustal faults. So these are closer to the surface, and they may cause tsunamis, but the Seattle and Tacoma faults, so underneath the city of Seattle, you can see kind of those red lines on the map. We can get crustal earthquakes. So all of these are different ways that we can have earthquakes. They have different frequencies and probability as potentially happening, but like I mentioned, the last major earthquake in Washington was the 2001 Nisqually quake. So, first things first, when you feel shaking or if you get an alert, the first thing you want to make sure you do is you want to drop to your hands and knees, cover the back of your head, and hold on to something sturdy. These are the primary safety actions that you want to take, especially being here in Edmonds and knowing that we can have very strong shaking from, Cascadia subduction zone earthquake or wherever it might be. Whenever there's shaking, that's your cue. Depending on where you are, there's some potentially different actions. If you're in bed, you want to stay there, hold a pillow over your head to protect yourself. You want to stay away from buildings. If you're in your car, you want to stop where it's safe. Turn on hazard lights, stay in your vehicle. And ultimately, that thing, though, is you want to lower your center of gravity and protect the back of your head, because you might be at the grocery store, you might be sleeping, you might be, at work. These are a bunch of things to keep in mind because they can happen anywhere at any time. We can't predict earthquakes, but we can get, if you're signed up for alerts, you can potentially get a earthquake early warning. How many of us have MyShake downloaded on our phones or have an Android phone specifically? Anyone that has an Android phone, believe it or not, you'll automatically get an alert for those as well. But there's a number of ways that you can potentially get a couple of seconds of notice, which is enough time to stop what you're doing and to drop, cover, hold on. It doesn't predict, but once something starts, you may be able to have a little more. Oh, yeah. So the question was, how can I explain the MyShake app? I'll actually go into a little bit more detail later about alerts for that. So I'll make sure to talk about that in more detail. So why is it important to not run out of a building during an earthquake or move? Earthquakes can be very dangerous. This is a video, I believe, from Christchurch, New Zealand, showing just why it's so important to, if you start to feel shaking, to immediately drop to your hands and knees, cover the back of your head and hold on. If you're running out of a building, you could potentially be, impacted by debris, you can fall, and, you can hurt yourself, especially if there's older buildings, older brick buildings and things. It's very unpredictable, during that. The U.S. Geological Survey says there's about a 50% chance that you're more likely to get injured if you are moving and walking around during an earthquake. You don't want to go to the center of a door frame and brace yourself. Your door frame is not going to be any stronger than any other part, of the building itself. Also, the doors can swing. There's only limited space. It truly is. It's scientifically proven. Drop, cover, hold on, and cover the back of your head. That's really important. So that's a little bit about earthquakes. So let's talk about tsunamis, which I know a lot of folks are really here to hear more about today. Tsunamis are caused by the displacement of a column of water. That can happen through a number of things. It can be a subduction zone, which is actually really well shown in this image, just how that works. So this is kind of like for thinking about the Cascadia subduction zone, you have one plate that is moving underneath another, and as tension builds over time, it is the slip of those right about here that pushes that water up, and it can cause those waves to go both directions. That is why when Japan had an earthquake and tsunami in 2011, we actually had tsunami waves that impacted the West Coast. You may have seen a lot of pictures, especially from California, on that, but that's a really good image to show. And ultimately, that's why, impact locally and distant. It's not just one wave, it's a series of waves. Like if you threw a pebble in a pond, the rippling back and forth, they can last 12 to 24 hours or even more. If you think about a wave moving from the outer coast of Washington coming in, there's all that wave action bouncing back and forth off the coast, kind of like if you're in a bathtub or, through something in water. The first wave is not often the highest or the most destructive. They're very unpredictable. We do some tsunami modeling to have a better understanding of what that might look like in our communities. And I'll share some examples of that modeling in some videos. And they're not like normal waves. On the bottom left-hand side of the screen here, you can see normal wind waves. They kind of roll and they come and go without flooding. However, tsunamis, they move quickly over lands like a wall of water. They're a very different kind of force, and we have some images and pictures to kind of show that. And I'm sure some of us have seen some pictures from around the world for this. So tsunamis in Edmonds, right? Tsunamis can, like I mentioned, they can be caused by a number of different things. These are some historic tsunamis from around the state throughout over the last century or so. A lot of tsunamis can be caused by landslides. So the displacement with the land coming in, that can cause tsunamis. In one of the famous ones is that in the Tacoma Narrows, there was a landslide. It caused a tsunami 6 to 8 feet. That might not sound very much, but I'm almost 6 feet tall, and 6 inches of water can knock someone off their feet. And certainly that would be something that could impact this area. We don't know a lot about landslides for like modeling, but we do know that there are quite a few instances of where tsunamis have significantly impacted our different communities around Washington. And we also know through tsunami deposits around the state of Washington, we can actually see different tsunami layers and deposits in the sand. It's a little hard to see on here, but basically you dig down in the soil, you start to see bands. And that are actually, it's evidence of, the sands and things being displaced and the waves coming in and out. Especially on the outer coast of Washington, we can see that evidence of this. So working with scientists, we can have a better understanding of what our past has looked like to potentially better inform our future. I did mention that there's, you can have tsunamis that are local and distant. Tsunamis that are local, you're going to feel the earthquake. If there's a local tsunami, you're going to feel the earthquake. You're shaking, not necessarily an alert, but the shaking that you feel, you don't know where that shaking's coming from. It's from the Cascadia subduction zone. If it's like in the Squally one or Seattle fault, it can come from anywhere. So your shaking's the primary warning that a tsunami might be on the way. And it can be very quick. And I'll talk more about specifics for this area of what that might look like in just a moment. Pretty severe inundation and severe currents. So inundations when the water is going over land, not flooding, and current speeds can pick up. Pretty big impact, especially for the coast. I would say when we talk about the Cascadia subduction zone, that's going to be the huge, much larger impact on the outer coast. Seattle fault, more impact on the inner coast of Washington. Now, distant tsunamis, you don't feel the earthquake. This can come from Alaska, Japan, across the world. Ultimately, the alerts themselves, getting the alert on your phone is going to be your primary warning, because it could look just like it is right outside right now. We could be in a tsunami warning because a huge earthquake in Alaska, and it takes time to travel. Typically, it's over 3 hours or so, and I'll talk more about what those alerts look like. Typically, there's less inundation and currents. The biggest distant threat for Washington is a tsunami from Alaska. I will tell you this, as it moves on the inner coast, it's very minimal for the inner coast of Washington where you all are. So let's talk about the big one, the Cascadia subduction zone, which I know is on a lot of people's minds and probably one of the main reasons why they're here today to learn about. Like I said, this is a 700-mile-long fault. Every 300 to 600 years or so, we've seen major earthquakes, especially over the last 10,000 years. Scientists think that there's about a 15 to 25% chance in the next 50 years that we could experience a large Cascadia earthquake and tsunami that impacts our state. The last time this happened was in the year 1700. We know what date it was because in Japan, they got an orphan tsunami without any shaking. And record keeping on there, January 26, 1700, record keepers over there and scholars said, where did this come from? And in looking at the geologic record, we actually confirmed by looking in the sand that it was from the Cascadia subduction zone. It hasn't been so long that we've learned, it's only been several decades that we've learned about the Cascadia subduction zone, but ultimately subduction zones can cause some of the largest earthquakes and tsunamis in the world. 2004 Indonesia, 2011 Japan are some of the most prominent ones. We know that we could potentially feel 3 to 6 minutes of shaking. So for those that raised your hand, if you were in the Squally earthquake, I believe that was around 40 seconds. It probably felt like minutes, much longer. So when we talk about Cascadia, 3 to 6 minutes of shaking is pretty significant. So that's why it's really important to drop cover, hold on. It can be very unexpected. But what we know is that as the wave is coming in from the outer coast of Washington, that energy does tend to dissipate a little bit. We know that it may be in about 2 hours after the earthquake is when we would experience potentially having that tsunami travel in to the Edmonds area. About 3 to 3.5 feet of inundation here, because a lot of that energy has been traveling. This does assume that we're not taking into account landslides and things like that that could happen as a result and secondary impacts. But ultimately, this gives us a kind of a decent understanding. That is pretty significant, and that's warning level waves if you're on the water, near shore, on a boat. But ultimately, what we know is that we can expect a lot of major infrastructure damage, a lot of overburden on emergency services, collapsed overpasses and buildings. So a lot of the earthquake impacts from that will be primary. This is a simulation of what that wave might look like. This is sped up, but everywhere red is 10 feet or higher, blue is 10 feet or lower. Within 10 to 15 minutes, the outer coast of Washington is getting significant waves, potentially up to 80 feet or so tall on the outer coast. And it takes some time to travel in. On the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that time, that's hours and minutes. This is about an hour and 40 minutes or so when it hits the San Juans. It starts to then direct itself south, and you'll see around that 2-ish hour mark, we start to see that waves are moving through the area. But like I mentioned, this is not just a one wave thing, multiple waves. So if you look on the inner coast, you can see reds and blues kind of going up and down, water coming in, water going out. We're on the bottom of the screen, we're about 4 hours in. This is something that's a long event. So the earthquake might only be 4 to 6 minutes of shaking, but the waves and the way what's going on out here on the water can be variable. I'll let this simulation play again just so you can kind of follow. This is from Washington Geological Survey. This is something that's available on YouTube, and you're able to look this up if you look up Cascadia simulation, video simulation. All of these resources are available online to you. But it helps us better understand and prepare what we might be seeing. Something I want to mention is that everything that's coming from the outer coast, it can be boats, debris, houses, chemicals, things like that, are following this wave too. So that's really important. Why we make these maps and simulations is so we can work with local emergency management and other folks to help think about their plans, and also share with folks what they can do. How many of us own boats here or go on the water? I got a couple of hands. So this is really important to know as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those resources. Shifting gears a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about the Seattle Fault Zone. The Seattle Fault Zone, there's a number of crustal faults. We're still learning a lot about it. On the very top, you can see it's not just one line. We got a lot going on there. But ultimately, the Seattle Fault can and has generated tsunamis. It's been a long time. I believe, let's see, we have it up here. So we take a look at the last major earthquake was in the year 900. So it's a long time. We're still learning about its recurrence interval. I would say that this is where we could see the most impacts. Like if we were to look at the largest tsunami threat in Edmonds, the Seattle Fault probably would be, because Seattle's right there. How many of us have been to Restoration Point or have seen that before? I'll show some, I think I have some pictures coming up, so no worries there. But ultimately, it was such a, what happens is one side of the fault, the land comes up, another part of it, it goes down, and it changes a little bit more about how we know about our environment. But ultimately, even though this is the maximum considered Seattle fault scenario for Washington, and it has the biggest impact for Edmonds, it's a very low probability of occurring. The Cascadia subduction zone has a much higher probability of occurring. Maybe it's less than 5% or so, but it's important we kind of map and understand what those impacts might look like for the area. This is Bainbridge Island. And if you take LiDAR imaging, where they're bouncing kind of light from satellites down to understand, hidden underneath Bainbridge Island, you can actually see on LiDAR imaging very clearly where that Seattle fault cuts across. It does go underneath the city of Seattle, Lake Washington, into Bellevue. So that's really kind of interesting to take a look at. What we know is for a Seattle fault, the maximum considered Seattle fault earthquake and tsunami that we can expect is that it could be within 10 to 15 minutes that a wave could arrive to this area. So that's not very much time. And we would have much more inundation in Edmonds than we would see for a Cascadia subduction zone tsunami. Wave heights might be around 5 feet or so, which is a lot of low-lying areas, especially where we are right now, that can be impacted. But ultimately, this kind of shows a little bit about what that timing looks like, the wave heights, but ultimately, like I mentioned, pretty low probability. But these are the two scenarios that we model for the area. These might be a little hard to see on this screen. No worries. This is all online, publicly available, and you can zoom in. There's products for the whole state of Washington. There's actually inundation and current speed modeling, what that could look like. On the left-hand side, you can see, you can see those areas. It's pretty minimal for inundation. However, that 3 feet or so in that area, it can come in especially in the marine facilities, low-lying areas near the shore here. It's important that you won't want to be in that area because, like I mentioned, 5 or 6 inches of water can certainly knock someone off their feet, and there could be unexpected impacts you might not be aware of. Landslides could potentially cause these to be a little higher too. The right side shows more inundation, some more water over land for the Seattle fault, earthquake, and tsunami as well. These are all online. I have links on the end, so I'll make sure if folks want to do that, you can take a look. So what do you do for a tsunami? Well, there's a couple ways we can know that a tsunami might be on the way. One, we want to take a look at our natural tsunami warning signs. One, I've already mentioned. If you feel shaking from an earthquake, that's your sign a tsunami could be on the way. We don't know. So you might as well take that protective action to know you might want to get away from the water after the shaking stops. You don't want to be necessarily near the water. If you see the water behaving or frothing or behaving abnormally, if you suddenly see the water pull out, whether you get an alert or not, if you see this water start receding out, don't go towards it. Don't start getting out your phones. You want to head to high ground. If you hear a loud roaring sound coming from the ocean, if there's, like I mentioned, especially if there's long or strong ground shaking, that's a cue that a tsunami might be on the way. Also, if you're on your boat, you might feel a shudder in your hull. That happens with folks, that kind of like a rumble and a shudder, like you almost may have hit something. That can be a sign. So natural warning signs are super important, especially for local earthquakes and tsunamis. However, official alerts are really important as well. So while I'm talking about this, feel free to take out your phones. If you open up the camera feature on your phone, aim it at one of these or both of these squares, you can find out more information to have, first of all, local alerts with your city of Edmonds. And then also you can download a tsunami evacuation app, just to kind of see all the maps are uploaded there too, to kind of show you where might be the place to get out, to get to high ground. And going to mil.wa.gov/alerts. And I have that at the end too, and I'll give some time for folks to see that. But ultimately, this website has alerts of all kinds for Washington State. This includes things like earthquake early warning, where you can find out how, here's a circle back to MyShake, what the MyShake app is. You can download that to potentially get earthquake early warning on your phone. You can learn how to make sure you get wireless emergency alerts from FEMA, and that's one of the ways that you'll get alerts for tsunamis. But like I mentioned, a whole slew of other information. It's a wealth of information, but for tsunamis specifically, you may get alerts through wireless emergency alerts, which is the same way. It kind of might look like an Amber Alert, local alerts, Twitter, how many of us are on social media, use Twitter, Facebook? The National Tsunami Warning Center pushes out these alerts on those websites as well. And we do too. One of the folks that pushes out some of that information, you might get an emergency alert, on the TV or the radio, especially if it's a tsunami warning. NOAA weather radios. Who has NOAA weather radios here in the room? We got a couple. NOAA weather radios is kind of like a smoke alarm. It's only going to work and turn on when you need it to if you have it programmed right. It's always listening, and it will go off to alert you for a number of things. Could be winter weather advisories, could be tsunami alerts too. Tsunami sirens. How many of us have heard the tsunami siren test that we do in the first early in the month? Westminster chimes is what you hear, except for one day of the year, which is on the Great Washington Shakeout, where we do test the actual wailing sound. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. These are a number of ways to kind of get those alerts. Redundancy is important, especially for alerts. But yeah, just go down. So whether you feel shaking or you get an alert, first thing you want to do is, if there's shaking, drop, cover, hold on, and wait. Because if you stand up, it's not predictable shaking. It depends on a lot of different factors. You could fall down, you could injure yourself, potentially immobilizing yourself, and you might be on your own. So you want to make sure you're protecting yourself. Drop, cover, hold on. First thing then after that is you want to grab a go bag, something that has some key emergency supplies and materials. I'll talk about how you can potentially build those. And then you want to head to high ground on foot. If you drive, there might be down power lines, roads can be buckled, there might be accidents, things like that that you might not be able to anticipate, and you could end up getting stuck. So, being able to walk to high ground, head to high ground is important. And then when you're at high ground, you want to stay there until you get the all clear from your local emergency management, local, city, county, to get that. Because like I mentioned, lots of waves coming in and out, and it's very unpredictable. All right, so let's talk about preparedness in general. How many of us have at home kits? They've built emergency kits of all different kinds, something. It's okay if it's small, it's okay if it's not finished. So if most of the room raised their hand, that's fantastic. I like to put this image on the screen from left to right. No matter where you are on your preparedness journey, actually you being here today is a really good step to figure out how you can prepare yourself, get some materials. A lot of folks grab some materials coming in the room, but ultimately you want to ask yourself some important questions. One is, are you going to be able to get alerted for that hazard, whatever it might be? I gave you some resources so far today to figure out how to sign up for alerts, and not only that, but your local alerts in Edmonds, which can give you more specific information. A question is, do you have a family emergency plan? What is your plan? It's very specific to everyone. It's different, especially if you have different, access and functional needs. You have other family members to check on as well. Do you have a go bag with you? Do you know what a go bag is? Do you know where to go? Evacuation routes. One of the main reasons that we're meeting here today is you recently have, over the summer, had new tsunami signs in your community. There's actually one that's right outside this window that says entering tsunami hazard zone. Using those signs and practicing walking those evacuation routes in case you are here near the water, where exactly is high ground, right? What I will tell you is that if you're, and I had a question earlier today, somebody asked me, our house is about 250 feet or so above sea level. Is a tsunami going to wash our house away? No, it won't, which is good. But you might be visiting the coast. You might be visiting the marina, and ultimately, knowing where you can go, where you might be, is really important. And that's why it's great to have some of these signs in here. The Washington Tsunami Program, I actually walked the routes with folks here to help them figure out where might be some good places to put those. So if you haven't already, maybe not this evening, but another time, kind of walk out to some of that farthest point. I'm not sure the exact name of that area, but if you go this way, you can practice walking and you'll see those routes. That's to help guide you out and where high ground might be. How are you going to communicate with your family? Do you have a plan, during an earthquake and a tsunami? Do you have a plan in emergencies in general of how you're communicating? Do you have a meeting place? What happens if you don't have cell service? These are really good conversations to have. And you don't have to be the mega prepper here on the right. I am not on the right-hand side. I just recently moved. I have a lot more rebuilding of my kit to do. And I have to kind of consider things, around my house. Have I done a home hazard hunt? Are there, do I have bowling balls on a shelf near my bed above where I sleep? No. I have talked to people that do have things like that, though, above their beds that aren't secure. You want to see, is this safe to have something like here if there was an earthquake? Are cabinets secured to the walls? You can do these things pretty easily, at least have those conversations. And ultimately, are you involved in any neighborhood or community preparedness? How many of us in the room are a part of CERT or have heard of CERT? Community Emergency Response Team, did I get it right? Great. So being involved in local preparedness, even just having the conversations, asking questions, bringing home some of the material that I have in the back of the room and sharing it with your neighbors, ultimately, those are kind of some of the key steps. So to make this simple, the first thing you want to do to break this down is you want to learn what your hazards are. So number one, learn your hazards. Today, you came to learn about tsunamis and earthquakes. Learn about the hazards in your area. In Washington, there's earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis. Even though you might be on 300 feet above sea level on the hill, maybe you're in an area that's prone to landslides. So learning your hazards, going to, the websites, I'll share some in the end of this presentation, checking those things out. Meteorological, so droughts, floods, storms, wildfires, right? Wildfire smoke. And also, more human-caused wildfires and pandemics. Pandemics was our big cue to see, are we prepared? Do we have what we need at home to potentially be on our own for a while? I did not have everything that I needed, but I did have some key things at home. A lot of us had to add new things to our emergency kits, like masks, specific kinds of masks to have, in our kits. But ultimately it's really important to, do this over time, a little bit at a time. Go to the grocery store, maybe grab one can at a time. You don't need to go to the grocery store, neither do you want to do that, where you grab 50 rolls of toilet paper and then they're all sold out for everyone else. You do not need that much toilet paper, I assure you. But that's what we saw. In the pandemic, we saw shelves empty of the things that we also didn't really need. And some of us may still have too much of those things. There might be some guilty folks in the room here, but ultimately, doing this over time, learning about your hazards helps you do. I jumped ahead a little bit. I'll get to that. Helps you build kits, making a plan. This is one of my former coworkers' dogs. Practice drop cover, hold on. So make a plan, right? Communicate, with folks. Think about what's communication going to be like? Where are you going in case of certain emergencies? And then how are you getting back with your family? How many of us have children? Or neighbor that lives far away that we like to check on, maybe. You want to come up with a plan to reunify, check on each other, to come, have a place to go, especially if you can't call them on the phone. Family plan, including your pets. How many of us have pets? Yes, you want to make sure you have plans for them too. Having their own go bags, or at least some things for them. And no matter where you are, workplace plan, other plans. One of the easiest things that you can do today is think about this. Do you have an out of area contact? Do you have one person? I do. So I live in Washington. Actually, this graphic works for me. My family lives in Tampa, Florida. They're my out-of-area contact, my mom. So if I'm, if I'm separated, let's say from some of my roommates that I live with, and we want to check on each other, we both have the same person we can contact if I can't get in touch with my roommates or my family that lives here, or friends or folks. So having that one established contact is important. In the very back of the room, one of the the things I have is an out-of-area contact card where you can have it in your wallet, or you can save it on your phone. Keeping in mind, one thing I want to mention is that text messages are more likely to go through than phone calls in an emergency. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as well. Letting folks know, letting that out-of-area contact know, I'm safe. This is where I'm going to go. And then that out-of-area contact might be able to share it with the other person if they do get in contact. Building kits. Yep. So like this picture shows, grabbing one can at a time, one step at a time. I work in government. I do not make a lot of money. I know a lot of folks maybe not either. So you can do this slowly over time. You don't have to go to Costco and tonight or tomorrow morning spend $500. You certainly can. You can go do it all tomorrow. But I know for someone like me, I'm not able to do that. But you're able to build these over time. Having a kit in your car. You might be at the grocery store. Remember, having a kit for specific considerations for your pets and your kids. Don't forget about them. It can go, as far as a bigger kit at home, having at least 2 weeks of supplies is recommended. Grab and go kits are meant to be, 2 to 3 days of supplies, for every person and pet in your household. Water, you can have life straws in there. Right? You do not need to carry a whole bunch of gallons of water when you're heading to high ground to do that. But ultimately, having kits to consider some of these things is really important. Like I mentioned, there's a grab and go kit, but at least at home, having at least 2 weeks of food and supplies is important. And that's at least a gallon of water per person per day per pet. Right? So 2 weeks, that's 14 gallons. There's a lot of different ways you can have 14 gallons of water per person, per pet at home. As long as you're careful, the water tank, your hot water tank can have water in it. Just let it cool down first. The reservoir for your toilet, not your toilet bowl, but the top part, that's a source of water. You can have life straws with you, water purification tablets. I have some water that's stored actually underneath my bed, and that's for all of hygiene, cooking purposes, and things like that. Ultimately, the main message to take away as well is you might be on your own for a while, whatever the emergency might be, especially for something like the Cascadia subduction zone. You want to ask yourself, who in your community will also need help? It's important that you get to know your neighbors, connect with friends and family, ask questions and think. If the unthinkable happens, what would we do? Especially folks that are in your community, especially with CERT programs, Map Your Neighborhood, or other kinds of programs. It is up to us to make that plan in case things do, the unthinkable can happen. The Cascadia subduction zone earthquake did happen here. It has happened over hundreds of years, and it was 324 years ago now. But ultimately, knowing your hazards, making plans, building kits, doing this together as a community, you can do quite a bit. How many of us are registered for the Great Washington Shakeout? Okay, you've got at least 6 or 7 people raise their hand in the room. The Great Washington Shakeout is something that our team runs at Washington Emergency Management on the state. This is the largest earthquake and tsunami drill in the world. All different states participate in this. 10/17 on October 17th this year. So next month, less than a month away, we're going to be testing. This is really important to know, especially so in case you get worried when 10/17 comes around, maybe put a reminder on your calendar. The actual wailing sound for the tsunami sirens, which you do have a few here, will go off. It is a very loud kind of wailing sound. It does share an audio clip. This is part of the alerting system, right? You have different ways. When you're outside, you might hear the siren. You might get an alert on your phone, the shaking. All of these things together work hand in hand, to give us a cue that a tsunami might be on the way. But ultimately, we do this testing to make sure the system works. We have 122 sirens in Washington State. We maintain and operate them. But on October 17th at 10:17 a.m., really important to know that that's going to be a test. There is going to be an audio that says that this is part of the Great Washington Shakeout, but it's a little hard to hear. Just know that that's part of that system. If you want to do this, if you want to commit to, you know what, I'm going to practice to drop, cover, hold on. If that's the littlest thing you do, look at your emergency kits, want to update them, you can register. You can register your family. You can register even if you have a business. You're like, you know what, maybe us and our business wants to kind of take part in this. Amazon, Microsoft, the University of Washington, all of these folks are practicing at least at this time to drop, cover, hold on, but it doesn't even have to be practicing it at that time. If you want to commit next month to practicing, discussing family emergency plans, practicing what to do during an earthquake, you can sign up. There's no commitment. You can even get a little certificate that you participated. Last year, I think we had 1.4 million people that participated. We're trying to beat California. So if you can help us out, it's super easy. You can do it at shakeout.org/Washington. That is my last slide. So just to recap today, chatted a lot about different things about tsunami and earthquake risk in Washington. There are a lot of different resources. The top one, you can scan on your phone all of these. These are QR codes to find more resources to how to get alerts, how to be prepared with different preparedness resources. Some of them are in the back of the room, and some of them you already have. And then also we have our tsunami webpage. If you're on Twitter or X, as it's now. These are our handles for that. We share a lot of different public education messaging and resources, a lot of information from the state level, from Washington Emergency Management. We also have a very active Facebook page. If folks already do, sometimes you may have seen me on there do videos and things. And if questions come along your way, especially about, earthquakes, earthquakes and tsunamis, volcanoes, geohazards, we have our email on the screen. We're happy to share and guide with that information. And like I mentioned, back of the room, feel free to grab whatever you'd like. That's what I have for you today. Thank you for listening. I know it's a little bit at the end of the day, the sun's setting, but thanks for being here. And thanks for, we'll just leave it at that, right?
So thank you, Dante. Absolutely. It was very informative. Two quick things I wanted to share. So I'm sure it's with the map and the inundation zone. 3rd Avenue is likely in that one map with the, was it the Seattle fault? So if you're down here, you feel the shaking, just keep in mind 3rd Avenue. So east of City Park is probably, you're going to be out of the inundation zone. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind as an Edmonds resident. The second thing that I was going to share with everybody is with those alert sirens, when they go off and they get tested each month, but they also do it with the Great Shakeout. And inevitably, you've probably seen it on your neighborhood groups, on social media. People say, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. They're not designed to be heard unless you're really right down here outdoors at the waterfront. So even up at Francis Anderson Center, for example, if you're indoors at the library, you're not going to hear it. You're certainly not going to hear it, in Emerald Hills or up by Five Corners or Perrineville. Occasionally, some people might say they hear it, and that has more to do with, the weather, like the wind and how clear it is and all of that. But generally speaking, and so you can help inform your neighbors if they're panicked that they didn't hear it, they're designed to be heard down here when you're in that zone. Lastly, what I want to share is one of our great boards and commissions, the Mayor's Climate Protection Committee of Edmonds, and they do a lot of work on climate change and informing residents about climate change risks, which some of these things, these natural disasters or emergencies can be driven by climate change. There will be a media release going out tomorrow, but since you're here and you're interested, I'm just going to let you know that coming up next month, they're doing a speaker series on October 2nd, 16th, and 30th. Those are all Wednesdays. They will be held here upstairs in Community Room B, but they'll also be on Zoom. And they're bringing together a great group of experts from the University of Washington and different state departments who've written things and are very knowledgeable. The topics are going to be sea level rise and coastal implications, climate impacts to flora and fauna, and atmospheric science and the climate. So just wanted to pass that along to everybody. And we hope you register for the Great Shakeout and Smart 911. And thank you for coming tonight.